It's one of the big question marks hanging over the markets right now, the upcoming U.S. presidential election. And it's not just a question of whether it'll be another Biden or Trump administration, but also which party will control Congress. There are numerous implications for investors. And my next two guests have written a report on this very topic. Bill Priest is vice chair at TD Wealth, and Kevin Hebner is managing director and global investment strategist also at TD Epoch, and they join me now. It is lovely to have you both here.
Nice to be here.
It's good that it's worked out. I'm really glad to start. We want to talk about the paper and talk about just the implications for investors. Before we get there, though, I thought it'd be worthwhile to set some context. And I know you're getting ready. You have a working title of something you're working on right now, something that may be called Gathering Storm, when talking about what's happening with the United States. And I know you talked about, there's three main things you're thinking about when you think about the Gathering Storm. And I think it's important to talk about the election in terms of what it will be functioning within. So let's start with this idea of Gathering Storm. Why Gathering Storm?
Well, it started from a series of books by Winston Churchill. He wrote a 6-volume report of the Second World War, and the very first volume was called A Gathering Storm. And so the thought was, it looks to us that there's some pretty negative stuff going on in the world. There's essentially, it falls in three headings, if you will. First of all, it's the end of globalization, and we have onshoring, if you will, as opposed to offshoring. And globalization was a very powerful force. It reflected something called the law of comparative advantage. And within the law of comparative advantage, it just said no matter how superior a country might be in making anything, it's all about their relative ability to manufacture or produce something that if pays you to trade with somebody so long as there is not the same relative difference. This was writ large from 1989 to, for 20 years, the law of comparative advantage was writ large around the world, and virtually everybody prospered. Yep. Now, not every country may have prospered, but within a country there were clearly some losses. So when you look at the United States, much of manufacturing was hollowed out. A lot of the steel capacity went abroad, and we did not help those steel workers, and they have become a political base in some cases, particularly for the Republican Party. In theory, with the law of comparative advantage, there's enough left over that you can retrain, re-educate, or supplement somebody's income. That's theory. It really didn't happen very much in the United States.
So that was the first one, which is the reversal of globalization. The second one, I know you and I were talking earlier about China's economic miracle, and it's over.
Well, yes, we think much of the China's economic miracle is over, and we can talk about that a little bit. Kevin's also done a lot of work on that too. And the third one was just the fiscal challenges that the United States in particular will be facing, and it applies to Europe as well, but particularly the United States. There'll be a number of fiscal challenges coming our way in the sense that your cost of debt is going to be going up. We've had very short maturities of debt. You've got to now roll those over. I think in a short period of time, you have something like $10 trillion of bonds have to be sold. So all of that's something we'll have to address in the next year or two. Yep. But it's a very unstable situation we're entering in as we go forward.
Yeah, and I think maybe if we just touch on maybe China's the economic miracle has maybe it's over or muted or slowed down significantly. Yes. Yeah. Maybe speak to that a little bit, Kevin, in terms of what that means.
Yeah. So the 3 Ds, as Bill was mentioning, deglobalization, debt tied into real estate, and then demographics. So trend growth goes something like 6 to 8% to now something like 2 to 3%. So still you have a strong consumer and there will be growth there. But in terms of real estate and other sectors of the economy, government investment in infrastructure, it looks very weak going forward. And so not as much a driver of the global economy. And so I think the weight of China, it's still very hefty, and they want to have their heft recognized in the global financial architecture. And that's part of the reason why the United States and China are butting heads in some areas. But a very different perspective on China going forward.
And then the final one, you mentioned about just the fiscal situation in the States. And again, when you and I were chatting earlier, Bill, I think you mentioned that 96% of GDP right now is being spent on servicing debt.
Well, yes, it's starting back in 1992. It was three years after the fall of the wall. America's debt was about 46% of GDP. It's now 96%, and it's accelerating. And frankly, neither party pays much attention to this. It's as if it's not something to worry about. But there were many reasons that allowed this to happen that don't exist anymore. Productivity was rising and growing in the United States. We had the peace dividend, which allowed us not to fund defense the way we had been doing it in the past. And a diminished Soviet Union just wasn't a real threat that it was prior to '89. But the competition with China and Russia now requires higher defense spending. We're going to need more money for an aging population. You need more money for cutting greenhouse gas emissions. And all that is going to cause an acceleration at a time when your cost of the debt is going up substantially.
It certainly sets the platform for when we got one of the most important elections coming out, not just for the United States and the world coming, what we're playing into. And you know, one thing that I think that I'm not sure, Kevin, if Bill, if you told me about it, but just the trust that Americans have right now in their institutions, in their governments, is also at all-time lows.
Yeah, there was a poll, I think it was by a major entity, that basically indicated that 20 years ago of the G7, no country's population had more trust in an institution than the U.S. And today, we're at the bottom. We're 7th out of 7. And in fact, when it comes to the judicial system, we're tied with Italy.